I should have known something was wrong when Margaret Whitfield invited me to lunch at the most expensive restaurant in the city. Just the two of us. No fiancé, no father-in-law, no pretense of family bonding. She sat across from me in her Chanel suit, stirring her martini with one perfectly manicured finger, and said the words that would change everything. "I'll wire you $4 million to walk away from my son. The transfer can happen within the hour. You disappear, he thinks you left on your own, and everyone moves on with their lives." She slid a single sheet of paper across the table, a wire transfer authorization form with my name already filled in, the amount written in her perfect handwriting. I was 26 years old, drowning in student debt, working 2 jobs just to afford my half of the rent. $4 million was generational wealth. Life-changing money. Never work again money. I looked at her cold, satisfied smile and realized she'd already decided I would take it. She'd already won. That was her first mistake. Because what Margaret didn't know was that I'd spent 3 months wondering why her son had suddenly started lying to me, why his phone was always face down, why he flinched when I touched him. And in the 15 seconds it took me to reach for that paper, I understood exactly what she'd bought with her money. Just not what she thought. Before I tell you how I spent every dollar of that money destroying the Whitfield family from the inside out, tell me where you're watching from and if you've ever been underestimated by someone who thought they could buy you. Sometimes the biggest mistake people make is assuming you're for sale. Drop your story in the comments. It started 8 months earlier when I met Carter Whitfield at a medical conference in Boston. I was there representing the pharmaceutical startup I worked for. He was there because his family owned half the private hospitals in New England. He was handsome in that effortless way rich people are, tall and charming with a smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. We talked for 3 hours about everything except money or status. He asked about my research, my goals, my terrible apartment with the radiator that clanged all night. 2 weeks later, he showed up at my office with coffee and an invitation to dinner. 6 months after that, he proposed on a beach in Cape Cod with a ring that cost more than my car. I said yes because I loved him. I didn't care about his family's money. I should have. The Whitfields made it clear from the beginning that I wasn't good enough. Margaret looked at me like I was something stuck to her shoe. Carter's father, Richard, was polite but distant, the kind of man who measures people by their portfolio and finds most of them lacking. His sister, Caroline, was worse, all fake smiles and backhanded compliments about my cute little career and charming thrift store clothes. But Carter defended me. He told them I was brilliant, that my work mattered, that he loved me for who I was, not where I came from. I believed him. For a while that was enough. Then things started changing. Small things at first. Carter canceling plans last minute. Taking phone calls in another room. Coming home late smelling like perfume that wasn't mine. When I asked about it, he'd kiss my forehead and say I was being paranoid, that work was stressful, that planning a wedding was making me anxious. I wanted to believe him. But I'm a scientist. I trust data more than reassurance. I started paying attention. Really paying attention. Carter's phone was always on silent now. He'd changed his passcode. He had lunch meetings that never appeared on his calendar, and business trips that didn't match his company's schedule. One night, I saw a text preview flash across his screen before he snatched it away. Just 3 words from a contact labeled M. She doesn't know yet. That was when I knew something was deeply wrong. But I didn't confront him. Instead, I did what I do best. I gathered evidence. I tracked his location through the app we'd installed for safety. I noted every late night, every canceled plan, every lie. I created a spreadsheet with dates, times, and patterns. And slowly, a picture emerged. Carter was meeting someone. Regularly. At hotels, restaurants, a condo in the financial district I'd never heard him mention. But here's the thing, I couldn't figure out who. There were no suspicious social media follows, no mysterious women in his contacts, no perfume-scented receipts. Just absence. Just lying. Just my fiancé slowly disappearing from our relationship while pretending everything was fine. Then Margaret invited me to lunch. She called me personally, her voice warm and gracious in a way that immediately set off alarm bells. "I think it's time you and I had a real conversation," she said. Woman to woman. About the future. I agreed because I wanted to know what she'd say. What excuse she'd make for her son's behavior. What manipulation she'd try. I walked into that restaurant expecting judgment or maybe an attempt to postpone the wedding. I didn't expect her to offer me enough money to retire at 26. Margaret didn't waste time on pleasantries. She ordered for both of us without asking what I wanted, then folded her hands and looked at me with something like pity. "You're a lovely girl," she said. "Smart. Accomplished in your way. But you're not right for this family. More importantly, you're not right for Carter." I asked her what she meant. She sighed like I was being deliberately difficult. "He needs someone who understands his world. Someone with the right connections, the right background. Someone who can help him, not hold him back." I felt my face flush, but I kept my voice steady. "Carter proposed to me. He chose me." Margaret smiled, and it was the coldest thing I'd ever seen. "Carter is young and idealistic. He thinks love is enough. But marriage in families like ours isn't about love. It's about legacy, stability, strategic partnerships. You're a distraction. A phase. And I'm offering you a generous exit before this becomes messier than it needs to be." She slid the wire transfer form across the table. $4 million. I can have it in your account before dessert arrives. Take it, leave quietly, and I'll make sure you land on your feet. I have connections at several research facilities. I can open doors for you that would otherwise stay closed. Think of it as compensation for your time and investment in your future. All you have to do is sign this form and provide your banking information. I stared at that paper for a long time. $4 million. Enough to pay off every debt, buy a house outright, never worry about money again. Long enough for Margaret to lean back satisfied, certain she'd won. That's when I picked up the pen. Her smile widened. And that's when I said, "I'll take it. But I have one condition." Her eyebrows rose. "You don't negotiate with $4 million, dear." "I want to know why," I said. "Why now? Why not 6 months ago before he proposed? Why wait until we've sent save the dates and booked a venue? And why $4 million? That's not just go-away money. That's silence money. What am I not supposed to find out?" Something flickered in Margaret's eyes. Hesitation. Calculation. She took a long sip of her martini before answering. "Because 6 months ago, it didn't matter. Now it does. And $4 million is what your permanent discretion is worth." That was all she'd give me. But it was enough. Because suddenly, all the pieces clicked into place. The timeline. The secrecy. The massive amount of money. The reason Carter had been pulling away. Margaret wasn't paying me to leave her son. She was paying me to disappear before I found out what he'd done. Something big. Something worth $4 million to keep quiet. I filled out the wire transfer form. I gave her my account information. I shook her hand. I thanked her for her generosity. And then I walked out of that restaurant and went straight to a private investigator I'd already contacted 2 weeks earlier. His name was Thomas Reed, former FBI, and his retainer cost exactly $50,000. A drop in the bucket now. Thomas had results within 3 days. Carter wasn't having an affair. At least, not in the way I'd thought. He was stealing from his family's company. Specifically, he'd been diverting funds from the Whitfield Medical Foundation, a charity his family ran that provided healthcare to underserved communities. Over the past 18 months, Carter had siphoned off nearly $12 million through fake vendor contracts, inflated equipment purchases, and ghost employees. The money went to offshore accounts and shell companies. Thomas couldn't tell me why. But he could tell me that someone else knew about it. Someone who'd been covering for Carter, hiding the discrepancies in the foundation's books, moving money around to delay audits. Margaret. She wasn't protecting her son from a gold digger. She was protecting him from a fraud investigation. And she'd assumed that paying me $4 million would make me go away before I stumbled onto evidence that could destroy them both. That $4 million would buy my silence forever, that I'd be so grateful for the money I'd never ask questions. She was wrong. I spent the next 2 weeks in my apartment, surrounded by documents, bank statements, and financial records Thomas had obtained through methods I didn't ask about. I barely slept. I lived on coffee and rage, piecing together exactly how the Whitfields had been operating. The foundation was a tax shelter and a money laundering operation disguised as charity. Richard knew. Caroline knew. They all knew. They'd been doing it for years, and Carter had just been clumsy enough to get greedy and reckless. The $4 million Margaret paid me? That came from the foundation too. She'd literally used stolen charity money to pay me off. The irony was almost funny. My phone rang constantly. Carter, asking where I was, if I was okay, saying we needed to talk. I didn't answer. Margaret called twice, both times leaving voicemails reminding me of our agreement and suggesting I'd already received what I came for. That I should enjoy my new life and forget about Boston. I deleted them without listening all the way through. Because I didn't take that money to disappear. I took it to bury them. On day 16, I contacted the FBI. Not the local field office, the Financial Crimes Unit in Washington. I handed them everything Thomas had found and everything I'd pieced together myself. Account numbers, transaction records, forged signatures, emails Carter had been stupid enough to keep in his cloud storage. The wire transfer Margaret had made to me, which I could prove came from foundation accounts. The agent who interviewed me was a woman named Sarah Chen, mid-30s, sharp-eyed and thoroughly unimpressed by the Whitfield name. "This is extensive," she said, flipping through the files. "How did you get all this?" I told her the truth. That I'd been engaged to Carter. That his mother had paid me $4 million to leave. That I'd used part of her money to hire an investigator because something felt wrong. "You took $4 million from them?" Sarah asked, eyebrows raised. "I did," I said. "Money that came from their charity fraud. I can prove that too. And I'm willing to return every penny if it helps the case." Sarah studied me for a long moment. Then she smiled. "We've been looking at the Whitfield Foundation for 8 months. We had pieces, but not enough to move forward. You just gave us everything we needed. And no, you don't have to return the money. It's legally yours." She made the transfer voluntarily. She told me it would take time. That I'd have to testify. That the Whitfields would come after me legally and personally. That having $4 million would make me look like a co-conspirator or accomplice. I told her I understood. I told her I wasn't afraid. I was lying about that last part. But I was too angry to let fear stop me. The FBI moved fast. They raided the foundation's offices on a Tuesday morning, seized computers and files, froze accounts. The news broke by noon. By evening, it was the lead story on every local station. Prominent Boston family under investigation for charity fraud. $12 million stolen from healthcare charity. The Whitfield name, so carefully polished for generations, cracked wide open in a single day. My phone exploded. Carter called 23 times. Margaret called and left a voicemail that was just heavy breathing and then a whispered, "You'll regret this. That money won't protect you." Caroline sent a series of texts that devolved from threats to begging to incoherent rage. I blocked all of them. I didn't need to hear their excuses. I watched the news coverage from my apartment with a glass of wine and Thomas Reed sitting across from me, grinning. "Hell of a way to end an engagement," he said. $4 million well spent. I raised my glass. Best investment Margaret Whitfield ever made. The fallout was spectacular. Richard Whitfield resigned from every board he sat on within 48 hours. The foundation was dissolved. Donors demanded refunds. Partners severed ties. The family's social standing, built over 3 generations, collapsed in less than a week. Carter tried to run. He made it as far as Logan Airport before federal agents stopped him at the gate. They found $800,000 in cash in 2 checked bags, along with a passport and a one-way ticket to the Cayman Islands. That detail made the evening news, and I watched it with something close to satisfaction. Margaret hired the best lawyers money could buy, but there's only so much expensive legal representation can do when the evidence is overwhelming and the prosecutors are motivated. Sarah Chen told me later that the case was a career maker for her team. Everybody wanted a piece of bringing down the Whitfields. And the fact that Margaret had paid me $4 million in hush money made headlines on its own. Journalists called me constantly, wanting my story. I gave exactly 1 interview to a national network and told them everything. How Margaret had offered me the money. How I'd taken it and used it to investigate. How the Whitfields had stolen from sick people to maintain their lifestyle. The interview went viral. The trial took 11 months. I testified for 3 full days. Carter's lawyers tried to paint me as a vengeful ex-fiancé, a gold digger who'd extorted $4 million from a concerned mother and then manufactured evidence out of spite. But the numbers didn't lie. The offshore accounts existed. The shell companies existed. The missing money existed. And Margaret's wire transfer to me, along with the wire transfer form she'd had prepared in advance, proved they'd known exactly what they were doing. The prosecution argued that Margaret had been so desperate to protect Carter that she'd paid me an enormous sum to disappear before I could discover their crimes. My recorded conversation with her, which I'd captured on my phone without her knowledge, included her saying, "Your permanent discretion is worth $4 million. That phrase became the headline everyone remembered. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. Carter was convicted on 19 counts of fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. He got 18 years in federal prison. Margaret was convicted as an accessory, for obstruction of justice, and for witness tampering. She got 12 years. Richard got 15. Caroline, who'd been smart enough to stay mostly uninvolved, got 5 years probation and a permanent ban from serving on any non-profit board. The judge ordered them to pay back every dollar they'd stolen, plus penalties. It totaled just over $19 million. Money they didn't have anymore because most of their assets had been seized or liquidated to pay legal fees. If you've ever had to choose between taking the easy money and doing the right thing, I want to hear about it. Drop a comment telling me what you decided and whether you'd make the same choice again. Sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that define who we really are. Share this with someone who needs to hear that you don't have to accept the role powerful people try to force you into. After the sentencing, I stood on the courthouse steps while reporters shouted questions. I kept my statement short. The Whitfields thought they could buy their way out of consequences. Margaret Whitfield thought $4 million was enough to purchase my silence and complicity. She thought money could make me look the other way while they stole from a charity meant to help dying patients. They were wrong. Nobody is above accountability. Not even them. Not for any amount of money. That clip played on the news for days. I became briefly famous as the woman who took down a dynasty. Some people called me a hero. Others called me vindictive. A few called me a hypocrite for keeping the money. I didn't care about any of those labels. I cared that Carter was sitting in a cell, that Margaret's designer wardrobe had been auctioned off to pay restitution, that the Whitfield name would be associated with fraud for the next 50 years. I'd taken their money and used it to destroy everything they'd built. That felt like justice. I moved out of Boston 6 months after the trial ended. Too many reporters, too many people recognizing me, too many memories. I took a job at a research facility in Seattle, far from the Whitfields and their ruined empire. The facility was prestigious, well-funded, and they didn't care about my tabloid history. They cared that I was good at my job. My student loans were paid off. I bought a house outright. No mortgage. I invested most of the remaining money conservatively, set up a trust, donated $1 million to legitimate healthcare charities to replace what the Whitfields had stolen. I had enough left over to never worry about money again. I adopted a cat. I started dating again, carefully, slowly, with a much better sense of what red flags looked like. Life didn't become perfect, but it became mine in a way it hadn't been when I was trying to fit into Carter's world. Sometimes I think about that lunch with Margaret. The way she'd smiled at me like I was predictable, like she'd already written the ending to my story. She thought she knew who I was. A broke girl from nowhere who'd do anything for money. She was right that I'd take the cash. She just never imagined I'd use it as ammunition. The thing about people like the Whitfields is they can't conceive of someone using their own weapons against them. They think money only flows one direction, that power only accumulates, that people like me are just obstacles to be bought off and forgotten. $4 million was supposed to be enough to make me disappear forever, to make me so comfortable I'd never ask questions. They never considered that sometimes, the person you underestimate is the most dangerous one in the room. Margaret taught me that. She handed me the resources to destroy her family and expected me to walk away quietly. Instead, I built a case that put them all in prison. A year after I moved to Seattle, I got a letter. It was from Margaret, forwarded through my lawyer because I'd blocked every other form of contact. The handwriting was still elegant, still perfectly controlled, but the words were different. She didn't apologize. She didn't beg. She just wrote, $4 million. I thought that would be enough. I thought you'd take it and run and never look back. You were smarter than I gave you credit for. That was my mistake. My very expensive mistake. At the bottom, almost like a postscript, she added, Carter asks about you sometimes. Wonders if you ever really loved him, or if you were always planning this. I tell him it doesn't matter now. The result is the same either way. I burned the letter in my kitchen sink and watched the paper curl and blacken. She was wrong about that too. I had loved Carter. That's what made the betrayal hurt so much. But love isn't enough when it's built on lies. And money, even $4 million, definitely isn't enough to make someone forget their worth or their conscience. If I could go back to that restaurant and refuse Margaret's offer, would I? Honestly, I don't know. Taking that money made me complicit in a way that still bothers me sometimes. I used dirty money to expose dirty people. But I also stopped them from stealing millions more from a charity that was supposed to help people who couldn't afford healthcare. I put criminals in prison. I proved that status and wealth don't equal immunity. Maybe that matters more than keeping my hands completely clean. Or maybe I just tell myself that so I can sleep at night. Either way, I don't regret it. The Whitfields thought they could buy me. Instead, they bought themselves a one-way ticket to federal prison. Margaret spent $4 million to protect her son. I spent it to make sure he faced consequences. Best investment either of us ever made. Here's what I learned from all of this. When someone offers you money to disappear, ask yourself why. What are they protecting? What do they think you know or might discover? What are they really buying? Because it's never just about you leaving. It's about control, about maintaining power, about keeping secrets buried. And when the amount is ridiculous, when it's life-changing money, that tells you the secret is enormous. Margaret didn't want me gone because I wasn't good enough for her son. She wanted me gone because I was too close to the truth. And when powerful people get desperate enough to offer you millions, that's when you have the most power. That's when you can choose what happens next. I chose justice over silence. I chose accountability over complicity. I chose my integrity over their money, even though I took their money to do it. Maybe that makes me a hypocrite. Or maybe it just makes me someone who learned to fight with the weapons available. The Whitfield family will be out of prison eventually. Carter in 18 years, Margaret in 12 if she gets good behavior. They'll be older, humbled maybe, their fortune gone and their name destroyed. I wonder sometimes if they'll think of me. If they'll remember the girl at that lunch who smiled and took the wire transfer form and walked away. I wonder if they'll realize that was the moment they lost everything. Not in the courtroom, not when the FBI showed up, but in that restaurant when they assumed I was for sale and never considered what I might do with their money once I had it. $4 million. That was their fatal mistake. Underestimating someone costs nothing until suddenly it costs everything. Thank you for staying with me through this entire story. If this made you think about a time someone tried to buy your silence or underestimate your strength, share it in the comments below. Your story might help someone else find their courage. Hit subscribe if you believe in holding powerful people accountable, no matter how untouchable they seem or how much money they have. I'll see you in the next one. Stay smart, stay strong, and never let anyone tell you what you're worth.